Well, we welcome you again to join us in our study of the death of Jesus Christ. And we're looking this week at, first of all, what took place and so forth. And then we're going to look in the next 3 days at the significance of his death, why he died, and why that matters to us. But we want to look at another subject today, and that is who crucified Jesus? Who killed Jesus? Who's responsible for the death of Jesus Christ? And it might surprise you to know that there's not any one source. We start off with the fact that Satan himself was very anxious to get rid of Jesus. And that goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. When Adam and Eve fell and the Lord cursed not only them, but creation and the devil himself, who was responsible for their fall, at least he was the tempter. We find that this curse in 3:15 goes this way. God says, I will put enmity between you, that is Satan, and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And when he says seed, it's singular, and he goes on to explain what that means. He shall bruise you on the head, and you shall bruise him on the heel. This is speaking prophetically of what would happen later, that the Lord himself would crush Satan. He would destroy Satan, but Satan himself would bruise him on the heel. So from the very beginning, the devil has wanted to do harm to the Son of God, to destroy him. When Jesus finally showed up on earth, Satan put out all the stops to try to tempt him to sin, to try to discredit him in any way he could, and failed. We saw that in our studies the last couple of weeks. But now that we've come to the end of his life, it's very likely that Satan thought that if he could kill Jesus physically, that the people would reject him, and he would have no redemptive influence over unbelievers. Of course, Satan was wrong. Satan is not omniscient. He is very wise, but somehow he misses the memo when it comes to God's redemptive plan. He seems to think somehow, some way, he can derail God. He's always thought that way, and he still thinks that way. And I think he thought that way at the cross. And so Jesus was put on the cross through the instrumentality of the devil, who even entered into Judas to betray him. So we know that he was concerned about that. But more than that, we find, if we go back to Acts chapter 2, that human beings are responsible for the crucifixion of Christ. We find in Acts chapter 2, verse 22, when Peter was preaching the first sermon of the church age at Pentecost, he said, Men of Israel, so he's directly looking at the Jews, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God with miracles and wonders and signs, which God performed through him in your midst, just as you yourself know, so you knew who he was. His signs attested to his deity and to his authority, and you rejected that. So he goes on, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. He throws a responsibility on them at this point. The Jews in particular were responsible for the death of Jesus Christ from a human perspective. And they delivered them over to the hands of godless men. So the Roman legions as well, the Roman Empire, representing Gentiles, were also responsible for the death of Jesus Christ. And so man put Jesus on the cross and crucified him. Satan instigated that. Both are responsible. But I read over verse 23 that also God himself is responsible for the death of Christ. This man delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. No accident. Christ didn't go to the cross because Satan orchestrated this marvelous scheme that tricked the Lord. He didn't go to the cross because humanity was so powerful God couldn't stop them. It was a predetermined plan. For all eternity, the Lord had planned out the crucifixion and resurrection of Jesus Christ for us. And so God, too, is responsible. But also, as we're talking about this, the Lord himself takes responsibility. Jesus does. Back in John chapter 10 and verse 15, Jesus says, I lay down my life for the sheep. And in verse 18, no one has taken it away from me, but I lay it down of my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. This commandment I received from the Father. So Jesus is making it clear that he also placed himself on the cross in a sense. He chose to go. No one could have forced the Son of God to go to the cross if he didn't want to go. And he went voluntarily of his own initiative for us. And that's what we'll get into tomorrow as we begin to look at the reason Jesus went to the cross and the significance for our lives. So we will look at that tomorrow and the next 2 days following that.